When we talk about learning how to draw or paint the human head, one of the first things we have to keep in our minds is that artists throughout history and across styles have depicted the human head in very different ways. This style observation chart tries to show some of these differences in terms of a continuum between realism and non-realism with respect to proportions and rendering. The Y or vertical dimension shows portraits that are very highly and realistically rendered at the top and very flat and with pushed color at the bottom. The X or horizontal dimension goes from portraits that are very realistic in terms of proportion to portraits with highly exaggerated proportions. The top left shows more photographic representations of portraits with realistic proportions and highly rendered forms in light and shade. As we move down, we see realistic proportions, but the colors have been pushed and/or flattened out. For example, Van Gogh, being a post-impressionist painter, really liked to use vibrant, intense color. He still modeled the form with his brushstrokes, but pushed the color beyond the realistic. Artwork more toward the bottom left corner has a more 2D graphic character. The Japanese word notan means light and dark balance. Japanese artwork emphasizing this 2D graphic character had a huge impact on early 20th century European and American artists. We can clearly see the notan influence on Matisse, where he flattens out the forms and shows the portrait more graphically or two-dimensionally. This more graphic representation allows him to totally abandon realistic color in favor of a more expressive use of color. As we move to the right, we see a departure from realistic proportions. Eyes are made larger, the mouth is often made smaller. At the top, we see a realistic depiction of form. And as we move down, more use of color or flattened shapes. This is a more stylized realism where shape design becomes more important than realistic depiction. Many highly popular, more commercialized mediums such as animated movies and comics fall into this range of stylized realism. As we get to the top right end of the chart, we see proportions that have been stretched way out from the real, yet the forms are still realistically rendered. As we move to the bottom, proportions are still exaggerated, but the forms start to flatten out more towards a notan or graphical 2D emphasis. As you grow and develop as an artist, you will probably gravitate to different parts of the chart. Everyone has their own set of preferences, and those preferences change over time. Pablo Picasso, for example, started out at the top left of the chart with highly rendered realistic paintings. His paintings began to get less and less realistic and more about color and shape. When you're learning to draw the human head, it is important to begin learning what realistic proportions are and how to render form realistically. Once you learn how to draw realistically, you can then choose to depart from that in order to express what you want to express as an individual artist. It's difficult to draw something stylized and make it convincing without having first studied it in a more realistic way. All skilled artists throughout history and across styles study and find inspiration from life. That's why it's important to master the basics of proportion and rendering as you develop your skills as an artist.